The legend of Robin Hood has been adapted countless times, but rarely with the anarchic spirit Mel Brooks brought to the screen in 1993. For years, fans speculated about the chaotic atmosphere behind the scenes of Robin Hood, Men in Tights, suspecting that the film's erratic energy was the product of on-set tension. However, the reality was far more intentional than the rumors suggested. Brooks was not a man losing control of his production. He was a master conductor orchestrating a specific kind of comedic discord. By examining the history of this cult classic, we uncover a fascinating look at how a veteran filmmaker pushed the boundaries of parody during a shifting landscape in Hollywood, proving that his sharp wit remained as potent as ever. To understand why Men in Tights feels the way it does, one must look at the trajectory of Mel Brooks' career. By the time this film reached production, he had already successfully deconstructed the Western in Blazing Saddles, horror in Young Frankenstein, and sci-fi in Spaceballs. Brooks operated on a unique premise. To truly parody a genre, one must first show deep affection for it. He didn't just want to mock the tropes, he wanted to celebrate the absurdity inherent in the storytelling itself. This approach required a delicate balance of reverence and irreverence, a feat that very few directors in the history of cinema have managed to pull off with such consistency. The seeds for this specific project were sown much earlier, with the 1975 television series When Things Were Rotten. Many fans do not realize that Brooks had already attempted a comedic take on Robin Hood decades prior. That show, while showcasing his signature slapstick style, struggled to find its footing and was ultimately canceled. Rather than viewing this as a failure, Brooks internalized the lessons learned. He recognized that the Robin Hood legend was packed with archetypal characters, the noble hero, the greedy sheriff, the damsel, that were ripe for satire. He simply needed a contemporary blockbuster to serve as the perfect punching bag. When the Kevin Costner-led Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves hit theaters, the timing was perfect. That film, with its high-octane drama, grand orchestral score, and that infamously inconsistent English accent, was a goldmine for a satirist of Brooks' caliber. Brooks realized he did not need to invent a new parody from scratch, he just needed to hold a mirror up to the self-seriousness of contemporary blockbusters. By leaning into the theatricality of the original legend, he was able to create a film that felt like a play put on by a group of friends who refused to take the source material seriously for even a single second. The decision to move forward was an act of cinematic defiance. While the industry was trending toward darker, grittier narratives, Brooks opted for something intentionally silly. He wasn't aiming for a polished, seamless epic. He wanted a movie that felt slightly unhinged, where the seams of the production were visible to the audience. This intentional lack of polish is what often leads viewers to believe the set must have been a disaster zone. In truth, it was a carefully curated environment where the director knew exactly how much chaos was needed to keep the audience laughing while keeping the story from collapsing under the weight of its own gags. Casting is arguably the most critical component of any parody, and Brooks was a master of identifying talent that could play absurdity with a straight face. He knew that if the actors started trying to be funny, the joke would fall flat. Instead, he needed performers who could commit entirely to the ridiculousness of their lines, treating a slapstick pratfall with the same dramatic intensity as a Shakespearean soliloquy. The search for the right leading man became a saga of its own, eventually leading to a phone call that almost ended before it began. Cary Elwes, fresh off the success of The Princess Bride, was the primary target for the role of Robin. The story of how he was cast has become a piece of industry lore. When Brooks reached out to offer him the part, Elwes was so convinced it was a prank call from a comedian friend that he hung up not once but twice. It is a hilarious testament to the reputation of the project that even the lead actor couldn't believe such a film was actually happening. Once the confusion was cleared up, the two bonded over a shared sense of humor that would define the film's tone. Beyond the lead, the secondary casting decisions showed how forward-thinking the production team was. Bringing in a 19-year-old Dave Chappelle to play Achu was a gamble that paid off significantly. At the time, Chappelle was a newcomer to the film industry, known primarily in the New York stand-up circuit. However, his natural timing and ability to riff on lines elevated the character from a simple sidekick to one of the most memorable parts of the ensemble. It was a clear example of Brooks' willingness to let new talent influence the direction of his work. The film also featured a unique dynamic with veteran character actors, such as Richard Lewis, who played the neurotic Prince John. Lewis brought his own brand of anxiety to the role, which perfectly fit the character's personality. The legend that he demanded no horses in his contract due to genuine phobia is often cited, but it also reflects how Brooks allowed his actors' real-world traits to seep into their performances. This wasn't just a director imposing a vision, It was a collaborative process where the actors had a voice in how their characters took shape on screen. One must also consider the role of the training sessions on set. While the film was a parody, the action needed to look professional for the contrast to be effective. The sword fighting sequences, choreographed under the guidance of veteran stunt coordinator Victor Paul, were not treated as throwaway gags. They were treated as legitimate action scenes. By having the actors train on weekends, they built a rapport that is visible in the final cut. When the actors are genuinely comfortable with each other, it translates into a better comedic rhythm. The atmosphere on set, while appearing chaotic to outsiders, was rooted in a strict hierarchy of rhythm. Brooks understood that comedy is mathematical. He would allow actors to experiment, but he also held the reins when it came to the packing of the delivery. The interplay between structured script and improvised energy created a unique aesthetic that was hallmarks of the film. It was the result of a director who had spent decades learning exactly what makes an audience laugh and exactly what makes them check their watches. Tracey Ullman's portrayal of Latrine serves as a perfect case study for this balance. She was a performer known for her spontaneous nature, and Brooks gave her the freedom to push the character to the limits of absurdity. The infamous line about her character's name change was not a masterfully crafted piece of writing from a committee, but a spur-of-the-moment decision that Brooks immediately recognized as a winner. By keeping that moment, he proved that he prioritized the success of the joke over the sanctity of the original screenplay. This approach extended to the way the cast interacted during breaks. The set was filled with laughter, which is often a sign of a healthy, productive working environment rather than one in conflict. It created a level of comfort that allowed for risk-taking. Actors who aren't afraid of looking foolish are the ones who produce the best comedy, and Brooks cultivated a space where losing one's dignity for the sake of a joke was considered the highest form of professional achievement. Even the production setbacks were handled with a sense of humor. When Richard Lewis fell ill, the production could have stalled, but the response was to keep the energy high and the morale intact. Brooks' legendary ability to handle pressure is what separated him from his peers. He saw a production schedule as a guideline, not a prison, and he was always ready to pivot when circumstances required it. This flexibility is what allows his films to retain a sense of spontaneity that is often missing from more rigid, modern comedies. The visual language of the film also helped ground the absurdity. By using traditional costumes and at times classic cinematography styles, the parody felt more pointed. It wasn't just a sketch show, it was a movie that looked like a movie, which made the sudden breaks from reality, like the fourth-wall-breaking archery scene, even more impactful. When the audience knows what to expect, a sudden departure from the expected is always funnier. It is interesting to analyze why critics were initially divided on the film. In the early 1990s, the landscape of comedy was shifting toward a more cynical tone. Brooks' style, which was inherently warm and inclusive even when it was mocking, felt like a throwback to a simpler time. Critics failed to see that what they perceived as juvenile was actually a highly sophisticated understanding of genre deconstruction. They wanted something that fit the mold of the era. Brooks gave them something timeless. The film's box office performance, while modest by the standards of a summer blockbuster, was not a reflection of its quality. It was a reflection of the audience's changing habits and the specific marketing challenges of a genre that is notoriously difficult to sell. Many great comedies of that era had similar paths, failing to capture the zeitgeist immediately, but finding a permanent home in the cultural consciousness of later generations. When looking at the film today, it is easy to see why it has endured. It isn't just about the jokes, it's about the heart. The characters are genuinely likable and there is a sense of joy in every scene. You can tell that everyone involved was having a good time, and that joy is infectious. It's the kind of production that, if it were made today, would likely be scrutinized for its chaos, yet the results speak for themselves. The legacy of the film is not just in its quotability, but in how it paved the way for future parodies. It demonstrated that you could respect the history of a story while still laughing at its inherent tropes. Many modern films attempt this but fail because they treat the parody as a mean-spirited exercise. Men in Tights succeeded because it was a love letter to the very genre it was satirizing. Ultimately, the chaos of the set was merely the sound of a team working in perfect harmony. It was a group of creative individuals who trusted their director, and a director who trusted his cast to find the comedy in the moment. It is the antithesis of the sterile, focus group comedy production that became the industry norm later on. The enduring popularity of the film is the final objective proof that Brooks' methods, however unconventional, worked perfectly. To understand the mechanics of the humor in Robin Hood, Men in Tights, we need to analyze how Mel Brooks used specific cinematic techniques to heighten the parody. Most comedy films rely on dialogue to carry the humor, but Brooks always prioritized the interplay between the visual gag and the timing of the actor's reaction. The scene involving the blind character, Blinken, is a masterclass in this. It isn't just that he walks into a tree, it's the lack of reaction from the surrounding characters and the sincerity of his recovery that makes it work. This is a recurring theme in Brooks' work, the sincere absurdity. He instructs his actors to be the anchor in a sea of madness. When a character plays a scene with absolute unblinking intensity while the situation is fundamentally ridiculous, the comedy doubles in effectiveness. It's a technique that requires immense discipline from the performer, as the natural human instinct in a funny situation is to start laughing or to wink at the audience. Brooks forbade that wink, forcing his actors to reside in the reality of the scene. Let's look at the script's evolution. Many of the most iconic lines were not in the initial drafts but were happy accidents discovered in the reading room. This is a testament to the collaborative atmosphere we discussed earlier. When you have a cast of talented comedians and actors, the script becomes a living document. The famous line regarding the English accent is perhaps the best example. It's a meta-commentary that directly addresses the elephant in the room regarding the competing film, turning a potential weakness of the genre into a strength of the parody. Fourth wall-breaking archery scene is another structural innovation. By having the character literally hold up the script, Brooks is doing something bold. He's reminding the viewer that they are in on the joke. It breaks the immersion, but in a way that creates a closer bond with the audience. It's a way of saying, we know this is ridiculous, you know it's ridiculous, let's have fun with that. That kind of transparency was revolutionary for the time, and changed how many people viewed the possibilities of parody. We should also discuss the musical elements. Mel Brooks has always loved the Broadway-style musical number, and he integrated this into the film to further mock the grandiosity of adventure epics. Usually medieval legends aren't known for their song and dance routines, so inserting them forces the audience to confront the absurdity of the genre's typical hero worship. It's a brilliant way to deflate the tension of a scene, while simultaneously adding a layer of campy charm. The pace of the editing is also worth noting. Comedies often suffer from dead air, where the timing between jokes is too slow or too cluttered. In Men in Tights, the editing is sharp and aggressive. Brooks cut scenes to emphasize the punchlines, often leaving just enough room for the audience to register the joke before moving on to the next absurdity. This packing ensures that the audience never has time to become critical of the plot, because there is always another gag right around the corner. This is where the idea of controlled chaos really comes to life. The film feels fast and loose, but if you rewatch it, you realize every cut serves a purpose. The transition from one joke to the next is seamless, which creates a sense of momentum. When a movie has momentum, the audience is more likely to forgive the smaller, less successful jokes. It keeps the energy high and the engagement consistent, which is exactly why it remains so watchable decades later. Consider the role of the costumes and set design. They were kept traditional enough to be recognizable, which allows the modern, anachronistic jokes to land with more force. If the sets were too stylized, the jokes would feel like they belonged in a cartoon. By keeping the world grounded in a classic movie look, the contrast with the ridiculous dialogue makes the humor feel sharper. It's a classic juxtaposition principle. The more serious the setting, the funnier the subversion. The casting of Cary Elwes was, in retrospect, the pivot point for the film's success. He brought a level of gravitas to the role of Robin that anchored the film. If they had cast a pure comedian in the role, the movie might have felt too much like a sketch show. Elwes played it as a romantic lead who just happened to be in a very strange version of history. That commitment provided the backbone the film needed to support the more outlandish characters. Dave Chappelle's presence also added a layer of modern perspective. While other characters were stuck in the medieval archetype, his character felt like a modern-day observer dropped into the past. This allowed for jokes that felt more relatable to a contemporary audience. It provided a bridge between the historical setting and the 1990s viewer, making the film feel more accessible and less like a dusty relic of the genre. The production team's decision to keep the sword fighting real also serves the parody. If the fights were just slapstick, it would have been a farce, not a parody. By making the fights look legitimate, they were essentially mocking the very concept of heroic combat in movies. It's a meta joke. Look how hard we're trying to make this look heroic, which is precisely why it's so silly. This level of irony is what gives the film its enduring appeal to film buffs. We must acknowledge the influence of the supporting cast, particularly the villains. A hero is only as strong as his villain, and by making the Sheriff of Rottingham so profoundly incompetent, Brooks amplified the heroism of Robin. It's a standard trope, but here it is played with such specific petty malice that it becomes something unique. The chemistry between the villains and the hero is what drives the emotional core of the film's narrative arc. The modernization of certain jokes was also a calculated risk. For instance, the references to taxes and government inefficiency were jabs at the era's political climate. While some might argue these jokes age the film, they actually give it a sense of time and place. It makes the movie a time capsule of what people were thinking and feeling in the early 90s, which adds to its value as a cultural artifact. Let's analyze the failure of the critics. Why did they miss the mark? Many critics in the 90s were looking for thematic depth or character development. They were trying to apply the criteria of a serious film to a piece of pure entertainment. It was a failure of the critical establishment to understand the function of parody. They expected a narrative, Brooks provided a playground. The home video market, which arrived just as the film left theaters, was the perfect venue for this kind of comedy. It allowed viewers to pause, rewind, and rewatch the jokes, because there were so many background gags and visual puns. The film actually rewarded repeat viewings. It was the hidden gem factor that eventually led to its cult status. It wasn't designed for a one-time theater experience, it was designed to be watched on a VHS tape with a group of friends. The film's soundtrack also played a subtle, often overlooked role. The music was composed to sound epic and sweeping, exactly like the soundtracks of the films it was parodying. This consistency helps the audience buy into the world, which makes the inevitable joke feel like a subversion of the music itself. It's another layer of the serious parody philosophy that Brooks mastered. The endurance of the jokes suggests a unique quality in the writing. Many comedies rely on pop culture references that die within a few years. Men in Tights uses references that are tied to the story of Robin Hood, which is timeless. As long as people know the legend of Robin Hood, they will understand the jokes. This is why the film hasn't faded away, even as the specific movies it parodies have become less relevant to new generations. The collaborative nature of the production, as evidenced by the room full of people laughing at script readings, is the secret sauce. You can't fake that energy. When a movie is built on the foundation of genuine laughter, it resonates with the audience on a subconscious level. People can tell when a film was lab-grown versus when it was human-made. Mel Brooks himself is a character in this story. His energy, his background as a stand-up, his history as a writer for Seed Caesar, it all fed into this production. He was more than a director, he was the head writer and the creative pulse. The film is a direct extension of his personality, which is why it feels so cohesive despite the apparent randomness of the humor. Finally, the film succeeds because it asks nothing of the audience other than to have fun. It doesn't try to teach a lesson or deliver a moral. It is a pure, concentrated dose of entertainment. In a world that is often too serious, the ability to create something that is unapologetically silly is a rare and valuable skill. That, more than anything else, is why it is still being watched and discussed today. Looking back at the trajectory of Robin Hood, Men in Tights reveals a fascinating story about the longevity of comedy. It is rare for a film to be dismissed by critics only to find a massive, dedicated audience through word of mouth and home media. This shift in perception is a testament to the fact that the audience's taste is often more sophisticated than the critical consensus of the time. The film didn't change. Our cultural appreciation for what Mel Brooks achieved simply caught up to it. The hidden gem narrative is central to its cult status. When a viewer discovers the film today, they feel like they've uncovered a secret, a piece of cinematic history that isn't talked about in the same breath as Blazing Saddles, but is arguably just as important for its influence on the genre. This creates a sense of community among fans who share the film's lines and inside jokes, further cementing its place in popular culture. We must also consider the role of the internet in keeping the film alive. In the era of social media, the most iconic moments, the English accent line, the guided missile arrow, the tree crash, are easily shared as clips. These short, digestible moments serve as an entry point for younger viewers who might never have seen the full film otherwise. The internet has allowed the movie to bypass the traditional critical gatekeepers and reach an audience that values it for what it is. A funny, warm, and expertly crafted parody. Is there any modern film that captures the same spirit? Very few. Modern parodies tend to be more cynical or reliant on fleeting memes. Men in Tights feels human because it was created in a studio environment that valued individual contribution over brand synergy. It's an artifact of an era where a director like Mel Brooks could take a swing at a big idea and have the studio let him make it without a committee of executives stripping away the personality. The collaboration between Elwes Chappelle and the supporting cast is a model for how ensemble comedies should be built. By fostering an environment where newcomers and veterans could share the screen, Brooks created a balanced energy. You don't have one person carrying the movie, you have a team that is working in tandem to make the world feel alive and reactive. This is a lesson that modern ensemble comedies would do well to study. Let's look at the impact on the actors themselves. For Cary Elwes, it became a career-defining role that proved his versatility. For Dave Chappelle, it was a platform that showcased his early comedic potential before he became a household name. These roles didn't just exist in a vacuum, they helped propel the careers of everyone involved, which shows how a risky project can often be the most rewarding for the talent. The film's focus on the absurdity of the hero's journey also feels relevant today. In a pop culture landscape dominated by superhero movies and high fantasy epics, the tropes that Brooks was parodying are more prevalent than ever. The overly serious hero is now the default mode for almost every major blockbuster. Consequently, Men in Tights feels less like a dated relic, and more like a necessary counterbalance to the seriousness of modern cinema. We should also credit the film for its technical competence. It is easy to make a bad parody. It is very hard to make a good one. The fact that the production team took the time to train the cast in swordplay and insisted on high-quality sets proves that they understood the value of craft. You can't parody excellence unless you are capable of reproducing it. That attention to detail is what allows the film to stand up to repeated viewings. The absence of mean-spirited humor is perhaps the most important takeaway for anyone interested in why the film persists. Many parodies are just cruel. Brooks' work is never about tearing anyone down, it's about highlighting the fun and the structure of the story. By keeping the tone light and affectionate, the film avoids the feeling of being a hit job, which is a mistake many later parodists made. When we talk about the film's inauthentic reputation, it's really a critique of the film's style, not its quality. The chaotic aesthetic was a choice. If you look closely at the framing and the performances, you see that the chaos is perfectly controlled. The editing rhythm, the comedic timing, and the physical staging all point to a very deliberate, very professional production. It's a classic case of an artist making something look easy because they've mastered their craft. The film also serves as a masterclass in the use of the straight man. Everyone around Robin is a little bit crazy, but they are all playing their insanity with complete conviction. This is what keeps the audience engaged. If everyone were just goofing around, the film would have no gravity. By having specific characters represent the ground of the scene, the humor has a platform to launch from. The legacy of the film is also tied to its music. The musical numbers are perfectly placed to break the tension and move the plot forward. They are catchy, well-performed, and serve as a brilliant parody of the epic score that was mandatory for any adventure film of that era. It's another layer of the cinematic language that the film subverts with grace. Looking back, it's clear that Brooks was ahead of his time in his approach to the meta film. He was using fourth-wall breaks and meta-commentary long before they became the industry standard. This has given the film a timeless feel, as these narrative tricks are now a standard part of the cinematic lexicon. It makes the film feel modern in a way that its contemporaries often don't. The film's structure, a series of interconnected sketches held together by a thin narrative thread, was the perfect format for a parody. It allowed for a high density of jokes without the burden of a complex plot. This allowed the movie to be infinitely rewatchable. You can pick it up at any point, watch for 10 minutes, and be guaranteed a few laughs. It's interesting to wonder what would have happened if the film had been a massive box office hit. Would it have sparked a trend of better, more affectionate parodies? Perhaps. Instead, the failure of its critics to embrace it meant that the industry largely moved away from this style of filmmaking, which only makes Men in Tights more valuable as a unique relic. The fact that fans are still asking questions about the production 30 years later is the ultimate sign of success. A movie that is forgotten doesn't generate this kind of curiosity. The rumors of chaos are just a way for fans to try to explain the inexplicable energy of the film. They can't believe it was just talent and hard work, so they search for a deeper, more dramatic story. The reality is actually more inspiring. A group of people led by a master of his craft came together to make something they loved. There was no secret drama, just the joy of making something funny. That is the most authentic story you can find in Hollywood, and it is the reason the film remains a classic. In the final analysis, Robin Hood, Men in Tights is a victory of vision over bureaucracy. It is a film that refused to play by the rules, and in doing so it created its own. For anyone looking for a lesson in how to build a lasting comedic legacy, there is no better subject to study. It is a reminder that in the world of art, sometimes the best approach is to stop trying to be correct and start trying to be honest, even if your honesty involves wearing tights in the forest. We conclude that the film remains a masterclass in the art of the parody. It has everything: heart, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to the bit. It serves as a bridge between the classic era of slapstick and the modern era of self-aware meta-comedy, and most importantly, it remains, after all these years, truly and undeniably funny. So the next time you watch it, pay attention to the small things. Notice the way the characters react to the absurdity of their world, the precision of the timing, and the genuine infectious joy that radiates from the screen. That isn't chaos you're seeing. It's the work of a master who knew that the most effective way to handle a legend was to make sure it never took itself too seriously. And for that, we remain grateful.